morning. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ty Combs. I am the family ministry director here, which means normally I hang out with all of your kids. But when Matthew's gone, I get to talk to you guys. So don't tell him I'm glad he's gone, but I like being up here. All right, so do any of you remember when Pokemon Go came out? You know, that game on your phone. When it first came out, I was like, no, I'm not going to play Pokemon. It's kind of lame. And so I avoided it, and then we went home to Kelly's house, to her mom's house one year for Christmas, and my brother-in-law, Josh, was playing it, and he was trying to tell me about it. I was like, I don't know, man, I want to be one of those people, play Pokemon. And then my lovely wife, she's one of 4 girls, and then there's her mom. So my brother-in-law was like, come on, man, it'll get us out of the house. We can just go have some bro time. I was like, okay. So, not that I love my wife's family, but, there's 5 girls in the house. And my brother-in-law were like, we got to figure something out. So I go, and he's like, yeah, we just got to go catch all these Pokemon. And I'm like, okay, so what's the goal? He's like, well, you got to go to Pokestops to get more Pokeballs so you can catch more Pokemon. I was like, okay, so you want to catch all the Pokemon. He's like, well, no. Then you want to go to a gym, and you want to fight other people's Pokemon. Okay, so the goal is to beat other people's Pokemon. He's like, well, no, because then when you beat other people, if you get enough candy, you can evolve your Pokemon to be a bigger Pokemon. I'm like, so the goal is to evolve everybody. He said, no. The goal is, it's a complicated game. And I was just getting so frustrated because here I am, like, we're driving all over Peoria, Illinois, trying to catch these Pokemon, and I don't even know why. And it was fun. It was a good waste of time, but I never really got the point besides that. So then I come home and I start playing it, and I was a youth pastor, so I told Kelly, I was like, no, it's fine. It's a ministry opportunity. This is what the kids are doing, so I'm going to play Pokemon. So I started to play, and then I got more and more into it, and then this past Christmas, we went back for Kelly's family Christmas, and my other brother-in-law, Jake, we're like, come on, Jake, you got to start playing some Pokemon. He's like, I didn't even know it was still a thing. I didn't either. So we all downloaded it, and so now here I am, the one trying to describe to my brother-in-law, Jake. He's like, okay, so I got to go catch Pokemon. I said, no, it's more than that. So you got to get all this candy and Stardust so you can evolve, and then you go to gym. And he was like, I don't get it. What's the point? And even last week, I got a text from Jake. This was 2 months ago, and he's still trying to figure out the point of Pokemon. He's like, so how do I sell these for cash? I was like, well, he thought this whole time he was going to make money off of this. So he was just like in this moment of frustration, like, I don't get it. Have you guys ever been in that moment where you're just like, you don't get the point and you're just frustrated? One of my favorite movies growing up, some of you may have seen it, is the movie Big with Tom Hanks, very young Tom Hanks. And the basic premise of the story is there's this kid, he's 13 years old, and he goes and there's this carnival game that's unplugged, and he says, oh, whatever, like, just, I wish I were bigger. And then he wakes up the next day, and he's still like 13 in his mind, but he's in the body of an adult. He's big. And so I have a clip for you guys that kind of shows Tom Hanks' character named Josh, where he's a kid, but he's trying to fill some grown-up shoes. He's at a meeting because that's what grown-ups are supposed to do, is go to meetings and look at charts. So he's there, and he's just kind of in this moment of frustration. So take a look at this clip. Josh, the character Josh, is just like, I don't get it. And he's kind of frustrated, like, why are you guys spending so much time? It's not even fun. So the character of Josh in this clip kind of reminds me a little bit of Peter in the story that we're going to look at today, where Peter is just kind of like, I don't get it. He's just kind of feeling that tension. So we're going to start in Mark chapter 8, and just to give you guys some context, what happens in Mark chapter 8 is we have Peter for the first time affirming that Jesus is the Messiah. So we read in Mark chapter 8, the first one says, Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, who do people say I am? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and so others one of the prophets. But what about you? Jesus asked. Who do you say that I am? Peter answered, you are the Messiah. So here we have Peter affirming that Jesus is the Messiah. He says, I know these other people say that you're just maybe John the Baptist or you're Elijah. You obviously have a connection with God, but I believe that you are the Messiah. And then right after this, something very interesting happens. It says, Jesus then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. See, here's where Peter is kind of in that moment of confusion. See, he just got done telling Jesus, yes, I believe you are the Messiah. And so Jesus then starts to explain, yes, and as the Son of Man, I must suffer and I must die. And Peter says, whoa, I think you're confused, Jesus. Like, you're the Messiah. You're supposed to save us, not die. And see, I see Peter's, the personality of Josh, the character of a 13-year-old in a grown-up's body, a little bit in Peter here, where Peter, let's not forget, he was a teenager, and I can't help but imagine that when he started to follow Jesus, when he dropped his nets to follow Jesus, he thought, this guy is going to save us. I'm a poor fisherman, that's all I'm destined to be, but this guy is going to save us. And I think Peter probably had some imagination of just like overthrowing Rome, that kind of victory, like the Jewish people are going to be saved, and Jesus is going to do it on some flaming chariots with swords in each hand, and he's going to just be cutting up all the Romans, and we're going to be victorious. You know, kind of like Tom Hanks is like, that's not fun. Let's do something fun. And Peter's like, yeah, let's do something fun, Jesus. Like, let's go whip up the Romans, huh? And then Jesus says, well, I must die. And Peter says, no, that's not. You're the Messiah. You're going to save us. You can't die. You're going to lead us. And right after this, but then Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples. He rebuked Peter, saying, get behind me, Satan. He said, you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. So Jesus is pretty harsh on Peter there, because Peter is just telling Jesus, you're the one confused. It's not me. Like, I know what we're about to do. I'm following you because we're going to be victorious. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, because he knows that Peter only has his selfish ambitions in mind. So then, right after he has this little conversation with Peter, he turns around to the entire crowd, and it says, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. That is not at all what Peter thought he was going to hear, what he wanted to hear. He's just in that minute of frustration. No, that's not why I followed you. I thought you were going to save us. You're just going to go die, and now you're telling all of us that we have to take up our cross? This isn't what I signed up for. So that's our context for what we read today. Today's text is called the Transfiguration, and we're just going to dive right in here. It says in Mark chapter 9, verse 2, it says, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say, for they were so frightened. So Peter's in this minute of frustration, and what's so interesting is that all 3 synoptic gospels have the timing exactly the same in this storyline of Peter affirming Jesus, then Peter being confused, and then the transfiguration happens. All 3 have them synced up to the day. And so I don't think it's any mistake that this is almost in response to Peter's confusion about who Jesus is and what his role is. So we see here that Moses comes down, Elijah is there, and Jesus is not just Jesus. He is like glorious, magnificent, like almost blinding Jesus. And Peter, who's been confused for about a week, is like, okay, Jesus, this is more like it. Let's stay here. I'll go build some tents. We can all stay here. I think Peter probably has in his mind, this is what I'm talking about. we just got the best draft picks in the world. We got Moses, we got Elijah, and now I got Jesus all in my team. This is okay. Let's stay here. I'll put up some tents. We'll get a game plan, and then nobody's going to stop us. This is what I'm talking about, Jesus. So I think that Peter is like, all right, I got the dream team right here. Because, see, when Peter sees Moses and when he sees Elijah, he doesn't just see two guys that he thought were dead. See, Moses, to Peter, to the Jews, Moses is the pillar of their faith. Moses represents the law, which is their constant. Everything that they know, the teachers of the law that we read about in the Bible were teachers of what Moses represented. The law is their constant. It's what they live by. It's what they make decisions by. It's what they live their life by. It represents this is who we are. This is our present tense. We are living in the law that Moses brought. And so he sees Moses, the representative of that. And on the other hand, he sees Elijah. And Elijah is known as like the chief priest. Elijah is known as the most prominent mouthpiece of God that they would have known. See, Peter and the other disciples would have memorized texts and stuff that these guys wrote and that were about these guys. And then they're standing there and he sees the pillar of the law and the pillar of the prophets there with Jesus. And he says, oh, this is good. Let's hang out here for a minute. But then what happens next completely blindsides Peter. We read on Mark chapter 9, verse 7. He says, "Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, 'This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him.' And suddenly when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead." So just as Peter thinks, oh, I'm starting to get it. We got Moses, we got Elijah. You can't stop us now. They hear God speak to them. God, the Father, speak to them, which does not happen very often in the New Testament. And so they look up because they hear it coming from a cloud. God says, "This is my son whom I love. Listen to him." And they look down, and what do they see? Nothing but Jesus. Jesus is the only one left. And again, in the disciples' mind, this is more than just, bummer, we didn't get to talk to Moses, we didn't get to talk to Elijah. But rather, they hear validation from God the Father himself saying, "This is my son, listen to him." Not, you, Moses, Elijah, and Jesus are all going to hang out and be friends, but rather, Jesus is the only one left. See, what this tells the disciples is that Jesus is not just a continuation of history. It's not Moses brought the law, then Elijah was the prophet, and then Jesus is the next chapter, and we're going to go on and we're going to kind of overthrow Rome and do our thing, and we're going to be in history books. It's not that Jesus is a continuation of history. It's that he is the culmination of it. Through this act of the transfiguration of Moses being present and Elijah being present, but then the most important part is that they disappear in the presence of Jesus. That the Old Testament didn't happen and then the New Testament happens. Rather, the Old Testament happens, the law and the prophets happen to point to this very moment when God himself became a man and came down to earth and is right in front of Peter, and he doesn't even know it. Only Jesus is left. What's interesting about this is that God the Father, when he spoke out of the cloud, he only spoke to 3 people. Every other time where we hear God speaking, especially in the New Testament, it's kind of to whoever's there. Like whoever can hear, God speaks. But in this situation, he speaks only to 3 teenage fishermen. The glory of God was revealed, visually, audibly, to 3 ordinary dudes. But then on their way down, I imagine that they're all talking to each other. Peter, James, and John are all whispering, maybe like fist bumping about, that was pretty sweet. And then on their way down, Jesus says to them, can you go back to the last text? He says, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. Bummer. They were so pumped about what had just happened, they were just imagining, man, I got to go tell the other disciples. They're not going to believe this. We saw Moses, Elijah. They were trying to figure out how to describe the words, how to use words to describe what Jesus even looked like. And they're coming down, and Jesus says, you can't tell anyone about this. I think Jesus did that because he knew that if Peter, James, and John went back to report to their friends what they had seen, they would have the same thought. Oh, yeah, Moses, Elijah, we're going to go just destroy the Romans that are oppressing us. We're going to go be the victorious nation. And they would have gotten it completely wrong. They would have completely misunderstood the purpose for the Transfiguration. So what was the purpose of the Transfiguration? This, beyond miraculous, this glory of God being revealed in a moment, what was the purpose of that? I think that it was a way to open up the eyes of Peter specifically, but all the disciples, which represent a lot of us, to say, Peter dropped his nets because he wanted to follow Jesus. And then he grew in his mind this expectation of, oh yeah, we're going to go defeat Rome. We're going to be victorious. We're going to be on the winning team. And then the Transfiguration is the moment when he realizes, I didn't drop my nets for what I thought I was. He had these expectations, and he comes to realize that it's not just his present that he set aside, being a fisherman. It's not just his past, his family that he left behind. But in the moment of the Transfiguration, I think what that represents is that Peter has come to the realization that he sets aside his future. Even though he decided to follow Jesus, God uses the words, not follow my son, but listen to my son. You hear the difference there? They were already following Jesus, but they had the voice of God come down to tell them, listen to my son. So in this moment of the Transfiguration, they start to realize, okay, I know I set aside my past. I know I set aside my present, my constant, being a fisherman, but now I don't even know what it looks like anymore. But they know that it is the one voice that has ever been validated by God. Nothing else they had been following had the voice of God come out of a cloud to speak to them. This is my son. Listen to him. The main point of the Transfiguration is to show the glory of God, but I think primarily it's to show that everything they've known, even the law, even the prophets, everything disappears in the presence of our Savior. I think that I resonate with Peter a lot because Peter, he kind of gets written off as kind of like the dumb disciple. I feel like when you read through the Gospels, it's like, man, did Peter screw up again? But I think what Peter does is he's that guy that says what everybody's thinking. I don't think he's actually like the dumb one. I think he's just saying what we're all thinking. All the other 11 probably liked Peter because they probably had the same questions. But Peter was the one willing to say it. And so we see Peter is so confident that he's right in his expectation of what Jesus' role is in the beginning. He affirms that he's the Messiah. But then Peter, this little teenage fisherman, pulls Jesus aside and says, you're confused, man. You can't die. You got to save us. Peter didn't have the mindset, oh, I could be wrong. Maybe Jesus is right. He said, no. He doesn't get it. I got to tell him. Peter had no idea he was the one that was confused. He was so confident that he rebukes the Son of God that he just affirmed was the Messiah. I mean, go, Peter. Some courage. But that's because the loudest voice in Peter's mind, the loudest voice was his own. The loudest voice was his own expectation. He wasn't letting the only voice that God has validated, has confirmed, be the loudest one in his mind. William Barclay says this about the disciples in this interaction. He says, they still did not understand, and their failure to understand was due to the cause which always makes man fail to understand. They clung to their way and refused to see God's way. They wished things as they desired them and not as God had ordered them, and this had blinded them to the revelation of God's truth. They clung to their way and refused to see God's way. They clung to their way. They knew they were right. Now, we've been talking about those people over the past few weeks. That's been our series as we're in this time of Epiphany. And the purpose of the series is to say that Jesus is Lord, not just for us in this room. Jesus is Lord and died on the cross for those people in your life, the ones that you write off as those people. And there are a lot of people in our lives, a lot of people in my life, that I would just consider, I use the word confused. But they would never admit that they are confused. And I look back and I know in my own life, I spent a majority of it in that state of confusion, but I was convinced that I was right. Just like Peter. He was so confused, but he was convinced that he was right. He was convinced that he was chasing the right things. And it took this encounter of the glory of God to show him, oh, I was confused. We live in a society that kind of teaches us to build the biggest and the best and to have our name stamped on as many things as we can. We want to have the most recognition when people say our name in our neighborhood, at work. We want to have the nicest house. We want to just have the sense of, I've built this. And the image that comes to mind as I think about this is that we live in a society that teaches us to strive and to get stressed out and to work so hard, spend endless hours, sleepless nights, working to build a mansion that is made out of straw. To build a mansion that looks beautiful, but in the blink of an eye, it's gone. In the grand scheme of eternity, the things that we stress about here and the things that we desire on this earth are nothing but straw. That even the slightest bit of wind will just knock it all down, and nobody will ever know. I had the awesome opportunity this week to hear the testimony from somebody in our congregation, and it just lines up perfectly with this concept of people in our society, us included, being confused without knowing it. And so I'm going to change the names of the people just to protect some privacy, but this woman, we'll call her Pam, was chasing the American dream. She had a good education. Husband had a good education. They were just kind of looking for the American dream. They were looking to have a good, stable job that made money, that brought them comfort, that provided for their kids. Nothing wrong with those things, but they were just searching for that and that alone. And so a few years went by, and they were working but didn't have the right connections, didn't have the right ends to have that job that they were wanting to land, that consistent thing that would just bring everything together. It would bring them money, it would bring them consistency, it would bring them a place of belonging. They just couldn't find it. So years went by, and then finally, whenever they did get offers, it required way too many hours a week to be with their family, or it required maybe a time of like an internship where they wouldn't get paid for a year. And so these things just weren't adding up, and the things that they had been chasing, this job, this comfort, this mansion, just weren't happening. And so Pam had a friend at her part-time job that she worked, we'll call her Michelle, and she just kind of started to talk to Pam. They just became friends, and as Pam was telling me this. She was like, I just noticed something about Michelle. I just noticed she was nice, and we just became friends. I went over to her house. I met her family. They were just great, great people. And then we started to realize that we both really liked reading. So they would talk about books. And then Michelle said, have you ever read the Bible? And Pam was like, no, it's kind of kooky stories and stuff. And Michelle was like, well, how about you read it? Even if you don't believe it, it's a good piece of literature. There's some beautiful imagery. You just read it. And Pam was like, okay, yeah, I'll read it. And she said, I never read it. I didn't want to read that. But Michelle didn't stop. She said, okay, well, how about on lunch break? I'll read it with you. We can read it together, and then we can talk about it, just as a piece of literature. So she's like, okay, well, I'll do that. So they started to talk about it over their lunch break and read. And then through that relationship, Michelle came to the point where she said, I want to tell you what this means to me, what the Bible means to me, what God is to me. And she revealed that God hears you, that God wants to listen to you, and that He wants to provide for you, but even more than that, He wants to give you a greater sense of belonging and purpose than this world. And so Michelle just kind of shared her testimony, and Pam said, that is the moment that I realized that I had been chasing a mansion just made of straw. Been chasing and stressing, and our lives seemed to be falling apart over something that wasn't even eternal. And she said that Michelle was 100% the reason that she is a Christian now and that they are a part of our church. And as I watched her just tell me that, and I could just see in her heart what Michelle meant to her. And I could tell, I've never met Michelle, I don't know who she is, but I could tell that she had genuine love and compassion, and that she genuinely wanted Pam to know who God was. And that story just moved me because I thought, I want to be more like Michelle. So I tell you that story because I think that in this room there are probably, in that story you're probably in one of two camps. Either you want to be more like Michelle, like you follow Jesus, but you want to be active. You want to go out and do His work. And you want to actually love people enough to read a Bible with them on your lunch break. Or maybe you are like Pam. Maybe you come to church because it's kind of what you're supposed to do. It's good to be here. But maybe you don't really genuinely follow Jesus, and you're not really jumped in, and maybe you're starting to realize, well, the things that do stress me out are not of that much significance in the grand scheme of eternity. So as you think about which side you're in, there's also a third one, and I think that this one is the one that Peter tells us about. And that is, maybe you've made that step of, yes, I follow Jesus. Yep, I dropped my nets. I dropped what I knew, and I said, yep, I'm going to follow Jesus. And you've had an experience like that, but maybe you're in a minute right now where you're listening and you're saying, there are things that stress me out, and there are hopes and expectations that I have, and maybe they're really, really good ones, but you just say, I don't think that they're happening. I thought when I signed up to be a Christian, it would fix this part of my life, and it would fix this part of my life, and then I could do this with my life. And you're looking around, and you're saying, I don't think any of that's happening, but I chose to follow Jesus, so these things should happen. And you're just striving and striving and striving, and they're not happening. And God is just saying to you, Moses and Elijah disappeared. The only thing left was Jesus. Maybe saying to you, don't strive, don't search for these things in your life, but rather listen to Jesus. So maybe you follow Him, but you realize that you're still just listening to the loudest voice in your mind, which is your own hopes. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up, and here in a little bit, I'm going to have our prayer counselors come up in just a few minutes. But I want to take a minute and do something. We did this in student ministries a couple weeks ago, and I think it was maybe for me more than it was for any of the students, but just, we talk about the cross a lot. We see it everywhere. It's kind of the Christian emblem, right? And we know what it signifies. You know, we could tell you, yes, this is what it means, but I want to just take a minute, and again, maybe this is just for me more than it is for any of you guys, but I want to take a minute, and I just want us to consider the cross. Consider what it really, truly means. And there's two sides of it. I want you to truly think about what it means in your life, what the cross actually means for you, beyond just something that you see at church and something that we reference. I want you to think about, what does the cross actually mean for me? And then I want you to think about those people in your life, maybe the people that are confused about what they're searching for and why they're searching for it. And maybe they are so convinced that they're right, and you just feel like you're pushing against them whenever you try to mention anything about God to them, because they think that, no, that's the wrong way. I know the right way. Maybe they are so confused and they are striving and stressing, and you look and you see their family is falling apart, and they have so many things in their life that are tearing them apart, and you just sit there and you think, it's all for what? They're just chasing pieces of straw here and there, and they're trying to build a mansion that you know will be gone in the blink of an eye. But Jesus came for those people. And we talked about a few weeks ago with the students that Jesus knew. He was aware that dying on the cross would be the worst form of human suffering he could imagine. He knew that. He wasn't blind to the pain. But he had the grand scope of eternity in mind, and he did not hesitate once to do it. And there's one reason for that, and the reason is because he knew before you were even born, he knew that you were worth it. He knew that pain, the suffering, he knew that you were worth it. Not just, okay, humanity is worth it, but he knew you. That's what gets me. He knew you. He knew all of the sins that you would commit. He knew all of the times that you would turn your back on what you knew to be good. He knew all the times that you would spend your life, your money, your time, your resources, your relationships, trying to grasp something that is just of this world. He knew all the times that you would do that, yet he knew that you were worth it. And what's even just as hard for me to understand is that he knew that person in my life was worth it too. That person who still has no regard for who God is, who's still confused, who is still just chasing the American dream blindly, and they have just absolutely no concern for what God is or what he has to say in their life. He knew that they were worth it. Even though they won't even give God the time of day, he knew that they were worth it, and he died on the cross for them. We're in this time of the church calendar called Epiphany, where we focus on Jesus as Lord. As we see in the Transfiguration, he speaks with God, and he is God, but he is Lord for all. He's not just Lord for us. So I want you to take out your Next Steps cards, and your bulletins are in the seat back, and I just want you to write whatever you feel like the Lord is telling you today. Maybe he's telling you that you need to be more like Michelle, and you need to truly care for people, and you need to come to a recognition that the cross was for that person in your life. A few weeks ago, we did the Who Is Your One part of our service, and maybe it's that name. Maybe you still need to write that name down and realize that Jesus died on the cross. He knew that that person was worth it. Maybe you're more like Peter, and you just realize that I follow Jesus, and I go to church, and I give my tithe, and I do my things. I follow him, and I'll say that he's Messiah. I'll say, yeah, I know, but are you listening to him? Is Jesus the loudest voice in your mind? So maybe you just need to jot that down. Or maybe you're more like Pam, and you think, you know what, I know who Jesus is, and I'm at church, obviously, but I don't know that I really ever come to a full recognition of that, and I just think maybe maybe I'm the confused person. Maybe I am chasing the wrong things. Maybe I am chasing recognition. Maybe I am chasing money. Maybe I'm chasing a relationship. And I think I'm confused. So I just want you to write down whatever you're thinking, and the prayer counselors come up now. The worship team is going to lead us, and I just want us to take a minute and consider the cross. Consider the cross in your life. Consider the cross in somebody else's life. And maybe you need to come up for prayer for something else. But we're just going to take a minute, and we're going to spend time in prayer. We're going to spend time with our focus on the cross, and that grace was poured out on that day.
We just want to thank you for watching the sermon online. If God is working in your heart, we would love to hear about it. You can go online, www.encountertrinity.com/nextstepscard. You can fill out information there. Let us know what God is doing in your heart. If you need help with anything, we would love to help. Counseling, we would love to do anything that we can to help you go to that next level spiritually. When you fill this out, it goes to one of our pastors. It is private, and we will take care of that information to the best of our ability. We love you, we care about you, and we want to see God do great things in your life. Have a great day.